Disclosure Network New York is a grassroots organization celebrating our 17th year, producing 2 meetings a month throughout the year in Manhattan. We focus on cutting-edge UFO, ET issues, paranormal phenomenon, and related subjects to reveal what is really in back of the mainstream news. We have prominent guest speakers who will address issues of interest to our group live or on Skype. Our motto is connecting the dots to seek truth. Our members do intense investigative research into the various topics and share their findings at our meetings and with our internet followers. DNNY makes available for free worldwide DNNY News Blast, which is an email service focusing on various topics of concern. To have that service for free, please visit www.DNNY.INFO. Today we are honored to have Major George Filer III, who, if you've read his bio, is unbelievably connected with the truth movement of UFOs and beyond. George, what a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
And I just got a few quick things as background. Just, if you will, like where were you born and grew up? Just a little bit of background, just quickly, if you will.
Well, I grew up in Oak Park, Illinois. Used to deliver newspapers to Frank Lloyd Wright's house and Ernest Hemingway's house. And interestingly enough, I used to be on radio on the Breakfast Club because that was one of the houses that I delivered news to.
And did you come from a big family? Do you have brothers and sisters, or?
Just one brother.
Okay. And at what age did you join the service?
Well, I graduated from Radley University in ROTC and then joined when I was 21.
Okay. And then take us from there to what happened next in your career.
Well, in the Air Force, UFOs, at least when I was there, were treated as something real, something that existed, something that we chased, and something that we talked about. And the pilots regularly talked about them. And first job out of a navigation school was to Athens, Greece. And it happened that my base commander, Captain Ramage, had not too long before been flying B-25s over Korea, and a UFO came up and flew alongside of him, and then it started doing rolls around his aircraft, and then finally went off real fast. And this was one of the first stories I heard in the Air Force, that UFOs were real, that they had seen them, and they had done kind of like joking around them, showing that their capability was far above anything that we had.
Right. And so then take us, if you will, to the next phase of your journey, discovering that all the things in the air that were flying weren't from our planet. Can we go there?
Right. After Athens, I was transferred to Sculthorpe Air Force Base, or RAF base in England, and we were flying tankers. And we did hear that the fighters were chasing UFOs, but they have limited fuel on board, particularly if they go to afterburner and so on. They couldn't stay airborne for more than an hour or so. And often these UFO chases are quite long. So they asked if the tankers, who we could stay airborne for like 13 hours, would be willing to chase the UFOs. We said, sure. Well, were refueling the fighters one night, and London Control called us. We're up over the North Sea in a pattern. London Control called and said, we have an unidentified over the Stonehenge area. Would you be willing to intercept? We said, sure. So in any case, we started towards Stonehenge, which is about 100 miles away. And we were given high priority, just like the Queen, and they kept all the other aircraft away from us as we dove on the UFO that was over the general Stonehenge area.
I just want to ask a question here, a little back up. At any point, were you ever ordered, or was there any conversation that if you ever saw anything in the air that looked like a UFO, you could not report it or you cannot talk about? Was there anything ever like that in your career?
No. In fact, it was reversed. If we saw anything that was unusual, we were to report it.
Right, because of the safety issues of in the air, if there's objects, you got to know exactly who they are, what they are, and where they're going.
Well, theoretically, they could be enemy missiles or...
Sure. Sure. So the time that, I guess the first time you started seeing things that what didn't make total sense, like what is this? I'm sure your mind was racing, trying to put that together. Can you remember any point where you thought, this isn't anything from here, this is something from another place? Was there ever a moment like that?
Yes. I might go on with the description of what happened, and then we can talk about it. But when we're diving on this object, and at about 400 knots or 425 miles an hour, you go through the red line of the aircraft. And as we're diving, we're well above the red line of the aircraft, which means that your wings or tail or something could come off. So the point is, to the excitement of the chase, we were going too fast, basically, and had to slow the aircraft down. Well, I had two radars at my position, and I put both of them on the UFO off in the distance, and about 35 miles or so from the UFO, I could pick up this very large return. I don't know if people are familiar with radar returns, but for example, if you fly over a bridge, such as the Firth of Forth Bridge in Scotland, you get a certain viewpoint on your radar. If you can imagine like a half a pencil on the radar screen. Well, this Firth of Forth Bridge was a mile long. In any case, our radar return that we picked up on our radar was almost exactly the same as the radar return of the Firth of Forth Bridge, which is a mile long. As we're getting closer to it, now that it's nighttime, we can see what looks like a huge ship out at sea with, 50 lights or something,
wow.
like a cruise ship. I don't know, we got about 5 miles or so from it, and it went directly up into space. And we were doing, we'll say 400, and it was doing about 40,000.
Whoa.
And besides that, this is a huge craft. I mean, And it went up into space, and London Control said, well, you can continue on your mission now. It's gone, which is essentially why they wanted us to intercept it, because people see these things, report them, and some people get scared and so on. Now, the interesting thing is that later on, I drove to Stonehenge, and right near Stonehenge is something called a cursus. And a cursus is about a mile long and has the cylinder shape that we saw in the air. And it was put on the ground there in England some 2,500 years ago, which would imply that the UFOs have been coming there on a regular basis. So I started checking around, and there's ancient burial grounds, which interestingly are the shape of a disc. And in these burial grounds are people, or they look like humans except they have very large heads, elongated heads, that in fact exist in England right to this day, and you can go and see them if you like, which would indicate that these were likely aliens who were there at that time and were building perhaps like the Stone Age and stuff. I think they also, interestingly enough, the pharaohs in Egypt have similar large heads.
Yes, that's true. We've seen photographs of that. Yeah.
And my speculation is that these aliens came from another planet, in distant past, and then started building these various stone monuments all over the world. And actually, if you start checking into our ancient ancestors, they were pretty much primitive. Matter of fact, you can go to various places in the world today, and they very primitive people that I feel that the aliens helped us advance. Now, the interesting part of the story is that when I got back to the base, the Air Force did not seem particularly interested in our intercept. We put it, loaded up with that navigator's log and wrote a little report about it, but nobody really said anything. As a matter of fact, they're more, kidding us. Did we really see anything? That kind of stuff.
Here we go with the kidding part that matches the truth, which you know very, very well, and so do we.
Well, it happened that weekend was a dining in, which is where like 100 officers get together and they dine together. Well, the speaker was Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, and Prince Philip gave a little speech, and he said, I want to sit down with the air crew that chased the UFO, over Stonehenge last week. So in any case, we sat down with Prince Philip, who was very friendly, just like one of the guys, and we told him the story pretty much like I just told you. And I asked Prince Philip why he was interested, and he said that his uncle, Lord or Earl Mountbatten, had raised him, and in fact introduced him to the Queen before she was the Queen, and got them together, so to speak. That he had seen UFOs both at his home in England, and people may remember, but he was the last viceroy in India, and he had seen them in India as well as being a admiral of the fleet, and the fleet was buzzed by UFOs. So Prince Philip was quite a believer in UFOs, and what he did, he says that whatever, air crews chased UFOs or shot at them or whatever, he would go and talk to them, or else he would have one of his aides talk to them and get a report that he was quite interested. I found out later that he had actually made some public statements about that UFOs were here, and that he always got the English equivalent of, MUFON's report each month. As a matter of fact, the whole family apparently is very interested in UFOs.
That's good news. There's so many people who tell, if they get the courage to tell their family, friends, or colleagues that they made a sighting, And it takes a little bit of guts to say, I know what I saw, and that was not a plane. Words can be used as a weapons, as you well know, and conspiracy theorist is another weapon used to mask the truth, to make people feel as though they can't tell what really they saw and heard with their own eyes and ears. And that goes on. Or oh yeah, you're looking at little green men, things like that that were put in the culture to mask, and that's deliberately done, as you well know, to mask what they don't want you to see or know. And
what I found out is that the higher you go, in other words, persons like the prince or the generals in the English army and so on, or the generals in the Air Force, in some cases even senators and so on, that they know. They know it's real, just like your audience there knows that it's real. Now, they don't go around, telling the public about it, obviously, but they're well aware.
But they talk amongst themselves about this.
Right, and all the presidents know about this, and there's a good sighting, and I know that quite a few of the presidents used to receive the various reports, and I used to send my reports to the White House, and I know that the Clintons were very interested in them. At least their secretaries called me and said they were interested. So the point being is that it's not a big secret among the highest levels.
Right. Do you think that the president, vice president, and so forth are regularly briefed on this subject? Do you think so?
If they have an interest.
Oh, okay.
I think just like, some of my friends have no interest and don't want to hear about it, and some presidents are that way, and other presidents want to read everything. Yeah. Now, I know that President Reagan was very interested. Yeah, so he got that briefing every morning. Yeah.
Right. And so was John F. Kennedy, also from our reading, was also very much interested in the subject. And
I think Carter was as well. Yeah. I don't know about President Trump, although it appears somebody's given the okay to release some of this information to, like, the New York Times and so on. And I think it has to be, well, either like the Secretary of Defense or CIA or the President has to say okay.
Yeah. How about, here's a question, the dark state. We're hearing more about that, even in the mainstream news now, which was the subject they were touched not too long ago. And what's the dynamic between the dark state, so to speak, and that group, Illuminati, and knowledge of UFOs? What kind of connections do you see? I'd just be curious your take on that.
Well, I assume that there's advanced as we're told they are, that they're well aware of them. And as a matter of fact, I'm the state director in New Jersey and the Eastern director of MUFON, and we get quite a few calls from people who've been abducted. And I probably met 100 abductees. And the abductees are basically saying that, 20 years ago they were becoming the mothers and fathers of the alien hybrids, but they're grown now. The point being is that there's a good chance that within our government at key places and so on are hybrids. I don't know if you follow that line of thinking. At least certainly it's a possibility.
Okay. During World War II, the Nazis and any connection with extraterrestrials, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I spent time trying to find out about that, and I don't know if you heard the name William Tompkins, but who was in the Navy and in intelligence, claimed that, and I've spoken to him, face to face and so on, claimed that he was being debriefed by Navy American spies who had been in Germany and came back, and they were claiming that the Germans had what we would call UFOs or flying discs, and that information allowing them to build those discs came from the aliens. Now,
Nazis were very much into the occult, as we all know, and that just kind of leads into contact. It seems logical that might have been the road that started to happen.
Now, we had checked with various aviation companies in Germany and so on, and they all denied it, but, like Messerschmitt and so on. So it's difficult to say for sure what happened. I do know this, that I went to the Air Force Library, and there's a woman there who's quite elderly, and I asked her about UFOs. And, can you tell me anything about them and so on and so forth? And basically, she said no, but I was there a couple of days, and I kept on talking to her and so on. One day she came over to me, and she had a file. And the file had to do with American colonels. One colonel particularly, I remember his name, Colonel Watson, was in charge of collecting the Nazi aircraft, like the Me-262 and their experimental aircraft, that weren't even in battle and so on. And they had something like 30 aircraft that they captured and put aboard a aircraft carrier to bring back to the United States. In other words, all the latest information that they could find from the Germans was being brought back. And they had a whole list of aircraft, which she showed me. But there was a blank. There was like 4 aircraft, but there was no names for them. Just like experimental aircraft or something like that. No description, nothing like that. But I have some indication from other areas that at least 1 or 2 of these discs were brought back way back in 1945, right at the end of the war. And I've had people who were stationed at Wright-Patterson claim that they saw them there. So I think there's some truth to the fact that the Germans may have had some flying discs. Now, how they operate, we don't know. I don't know.
Right. I'm going to take, if I could, a 10-minute break and call you back in 10 minutes, George. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay, so in about 10 minutes, we'll call you back.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so what we have now are a couple of people who have a couple of questions. They've been listening to your interview. Would it be all right with you if they asked you a brief question?
Sure.
Oh, thank you so much for that courtesy. I really appreciate that. So if you will, say your first name and then your question.
My name is Rena. What I was wondering, you talked about flying saucers doing acrobatics in the air. Well, I saw one time flying upside down, about a 60-foot disc, wide disc. Have you ever seen a disc flying upside down? Then it righted itself, and then it zoomed off into the distance.
And I personally have not. I've been told by other people that they've seen them. They apparently have, tremendous maneuverability. that I'm told that when you're inside the disc, that you don't have a feeling like you're flying like in an aircraft. It's like you're just sitting at home in your room, but you're actually moving at thousands of miles an hour.
What technology that is. Oh my God. We have another question. Come on up. Quick.
Sure.
First name?
Hi, my name is Paul. I'd like to ask you, how did these governments come into the possession of these spaceships? Either shot down, lightning, or they forgot to hit the brakes.
Thank you.
I think it's a combination of things. I talked to a Marine who was in Peru who claimed that he went out to see one and it appeared to have been shot down, that it had a hole in its side. Other people say that, particularly like the Roswell craft, they think it had something to do with either lightning, possible crash between two UFOs, or radars. There's been various, reasons given for them crashing. Matter of fact, the fourth reason was that they were deliberately put there by the aliens. So I don't know why they crash, and they don't crash very often compared to our aircraft.
Okay, thank you for that. You got another question? Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. My name is Julio Barrier, and we need each other to seek the truth and for more world peace. I forgot the gentleman. I believe that you interviewed. He worked at Area 51, and why was it the reason that Stanton Freeman kept debunking him and said that he was like a fake? Do you have any answers to that?
Who debunked him?
I forgot the person that worked at S4 at Area 51, and he said there were like 9 different types of UFOs there. I think, didn't you do an interview with him?
Bob Lazar.
Bob Lazar.
Right, thank you. Yeah.
Bob Lazar. You're probably speaking of Bob Lazar, but I'm not certain.
Right. Why does Stanton Freeman debunk him?
Okay. Thank you. George?
Well, it appears that very early the presidents and the people in charge wanted to keep this all quiet. And when anyone comes out and starts speaking authentically, claiming they were Area 51 or S4 or whatever, they generally debunk them. As a matter of fact, sometimes they'll, claim that they're messing with children or whatever. In other words, it's dangerous saying things like that about UFOs. Now, the CIA had me to lunch one day, and or maybe it was dinner, but in any case, we sat around the table, and they tried to convince me that UFOs were just plasma in the sky, that electrical plasma like ball lightning, and that your eyes and your brain took this plasma and turned it into a spaceship. And
You're getting a lot of laughter in the room, George, for that.
Well, in any case, I tell them the story about Prince Philip and so on, and that Prince Philip and I agree that they're real aircraft and so on. He said, well, if you're going to be like that, be very public about it. You'll be a lot safer. So I've been very public since then. Apparently, from what I can find out, is 2 groups in the government. One group wants to bring the information out, and they do bring certain things out at certain times through the years, but they always have this deniability. And then there's another group that kind of wants to keep everything quiet. And for example, somebody's bringing this information out in the New York Times and so on, somewhere in the government, I don't know if it's President Trump or someone high up is given the okay to bring that out, to make it more believable. And the main reason they keep it quiet, of course, is that we use that technology for our uses in our aircraft and so on.
Well, once they start doing disclosure, it does open up a lot of doors, and that is the good news and the bad news, as I'm sure you agree, because you're going to have to explain why, since the 40s, the truth was diverted aggressively. Some people have theorized, George, that perhaps originally it was good intentions, that they felt as though a disclosure of UFO activity in the skies over the nation was going to panic the citizens, and that the citizens weren't ready for that news. And perhaps, and I'm saying just perhaps, some of the original thoughts might have been good in the sense of protection of the citizens until there's a time when we feel as though we can say this. But then again, that progressed into outrageous, aggressive lies, and then people's lives and people around them became in jeopardy, and those stories by the hundreds are there. So once you open up that door, it goes both ways, Any thoughts on that?
Well, there's a couple thoughts. One, of course, once the president or anyone real high says this is top secret or even above top secret, it usually takes, we'll say the president or we'll say Secretary of Defense, somebody at a very high level to downgrade it. In other words, it's not automatically downgraded.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And allegedly, Patel, which is in Columbus, Ohio, did a study of what would happen if they announced, that this was all true, et cetera, about UFOs. And they said that their conclusion of these scientists and so on was that there would be, riots, and the stock market would fall, and the religion would be in trouble, and et cetera, that it would be a disaster. And allegedly, that's one of the reasons why they haven't brought the information out, but that they're deliberately bringing it out in little bits and pieces so that the people are starting to accept it, and realize that it may be true, et cetera.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money on that, and we're seeing more and more of that taking place on many levels, not just in the movie industry with the scripts, on television. Some of the programs are going very deep into that. Also, the cable networks are approaching those subjects. So
like X-Files, and I don't know if you know Sam Sherman, but he made a lot of different movies, like 50 different movies. But he talked to various producers and other directors in the field, and he was told that in many cases the government helped make these movies and would guarantee, the people making the movie that they wouldn't lose any money. And like, E.T. and some of these Star Wars and so on were all allegedly, at least back then, in some cases even given some pictures or video of the UFOs and so on. And Colonel Collins, who was head of public relations in the Air Force for many years, actually was helped make some of these different movies. I don't know if you remember, but there was like a series of TV shows about UFOs. It only stayed on a year or so, but in any case, he was helping by consulting that. In other words, so we would have the good information to feed to the public.
It's in the culture. It's more in the culture now than it ever has been. I think most people would have to be under a rock not to know that that's going on. And there's a lot of leads into this now, I think, on the mainstream also. I want to ask a couple of questions. Have you ever seen a UFO submerge into a lake or an ocean? There's been so many reports, especially in Southern California about that. That's one place. And also over Canada in one of those big lakes. Have you ever personally witnessed that or talked to anybody about that?
Well, yes, I've talked to quite a few people that have seen that. My own personal experience was that in 1980, I moved to this house that I'm living in now, and about 2 o'clock in the morning, the whole bedroom lit up. I mean, really bright, so bright that it woke me up. So we just moved in the house, and there was no curtains on the window or anything. So I looked out the window, and I live on a lake, and I could see this UFO surfacing.
Wow.
You see a submarine surface look just like that, and it had all these big bright lights circling it.
Oh boy.
I've had, I don't know, 5 or 6 UFO, well, actually more than that, sightings. Chased them in the Air Force and so on.
So that doesn't look like it's swamp gas, does it, my friend?
No, it looked real to me. I mean, exactly. I could look out the window one direction and see cars and out the other and see a UFO. And interestingly, it was like November and the lake froze like in December. So I went out there with the Christmas lights, and you know how you remember the size. In any case, I made the Christmas lights to the size of the diameter of the disc. It turned out they were 25 feet in diameter. So, and I even drew pictures of it, you know.
Okay. Wow.
They've kind of followed me my whole life, frankly.
Oh, I'm sure. Also, the whole subject of Antarctica has been surfacing a lot in the last year, as you well know. Prominent people from the government all of a sudden are visiting Antarctica. You know, what is up? We know some of the stories about Admiral Byrd and what was going on there. If you have any comments on him, or currently, if there's any information of what is really going on in Antarctica, we would love to know that.
Interestingly enough, I'm allegedly a distant relative of Admiral Byrd, and that when he was down there with a whole fleet of ships, they were apparently attacked by, well, what people call UFOs, you know, discs, that kind of thing. We lost some aircraft and people and so on. The Navy will admit to losing the aircraft and the ships. They won't admit to the fact that it was from UFOs, but they lost them when they were down in Antarctica. So Admiral Byrd came to, I think it was Chile or Argentina, and put in the paper that, you know, they were attacked, and that these craft had amazing capability and they could, you know, reach anywhere in the world. And in any case, I put that in my files a couple times that Admiral Byrd felt that they had this tremendous capability. Now the story is that our people are going down there and they've apparently found ancient ruins and possibly, you know, evidence of this base that existed back in 1946 or whatever it was. Now, nobody's saying for sure what they're seeing, but it's probably going to be coming out pretty soon. There's a lot of melting going on, which is opening up the area.
Right, yeah, it's just becoming quite a subject. More information is needed. Another question. We once, for one of our meetings, explored the Captain Valiant Thor story about him living at the Pentagon, about he was from Venus, about how, according to the story, he was advocating some advanced information in terms of medicine and other fuels for our planet in exchange for us locking down our nuclear ambitions worldwide. And according to the story, that was rejected and he left. But he was living at the Pentagon for a long time. Sorry, do you feel as though there's any truth to that story?
Yes. I had it from, well, I met Dr. Stranges, who was a very good friend of Valiant Thor. And Dr. Stranges was a pastor and seemed to be a very honest man, you know, and told me about Valiant Thor. Now, when I was in the Air Force, one of my main jobs was in intelligence, and I would brief generals every morning for years, for like 15 years, and I had a fairly good reputation, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff were looking for new briefers. So they invited me to the Pentagon, in a sense, to ask me if I wanted to be hired by them and so on. Well, in any case, I was being shown around the Pentagon, and one interesting thing is they showed me this room, and in this room was a teletype machine. And the teletype machine was directly connected to a similar teletype machine in the Soviet Union. And the reason for the teletype machines were that UFOs would take off from somewhere in the Soviet Union and fly over Germany, and we would think the Russians were attacking us. And with the teletype machines, if there's UFOs coming, you know, it's not us attacking you. And vice versa. UFOs would take off or fly over Germany and Russia, and they think that we were being attacked. So it ended up that the United States and the Soviet Union worked together for years, chasing UFOs and contacting each other about the information about UFOs and so on. The second part of the story is, while I was in the Pentagon, they told me that there was an alien there. They didn't give me the name like Valiant Thor. I think they just say there's an alien from another planet here. And I said, well, I'd like to meet him. Well, in any case, they wouldn't allow me to meet him. But I was told that he was there by an Air Force colonel friend of mine.
It's such an incredible story on so many levels that we researched this as a group, and we ended up theorizing that that was a true story. It just seemed like there's too many elements that were put together that there was a lot of truth in it. So it's just an incredible story about in the UFO community. One more question, George. I want to. Your newsletter, The Filer Files, is so extraordinary, and I do mean that. We look forward to it. We give it to on the internet. When I get it, I forward it to everybody on our list. How did that happen? And how many years? I believe it's 17 years that it's been going. Give us a little bit about doing that and what's going on. Is that through MUFON?
Well, not really. I was appointed the Eastern MUFON director of 21 states in the East and Puerto Rico. And in the Air Force, I used to write a daily intelligence summary. And when I became the Eastern director, I found out that not an awful lot of our field investigators were really learning what was going on in the field. So I started collecting what I consider the better UFO stories for that week. and publishing them. And that was in 1997 when I first started.
Wow.
And I've done it every week since then. I might have missed a week or two, being in the hospital or whatever. But I mean, and I kind of enjoy it. And I did something similar in the Air Force. Now, that was not usually have anything to do with UFOs, although I will say about once every month or two, we would get reports from our air crews about UFOs nearby them. Pretty much standard stuff, you know. We see UFO and it's flying near us or above us or behind us or around us or whatever. And then I would brief the generals about it. And one that I can remember that generals were really interested in was the 1976 Tehran, Iran intercept by two F-4s who've tried to fire on the UFO, and their weapons would not fire and so on. I don't know if you remember that story, but that was also on radar, but it was also on satellite. At the time, it was secret. It's been downgraded now. But that kind of a story, I would brief the generals, and they always were very interested, took it very seriously. There was not, laughing and all that kind of stuff. There was just like your group there is listening intently, I think. That's how the generals were. They were interested. They realized that something's going on.
George, I want to take another just quick 10-minute break, and then we'll do the wrap up to it. Can I call you back in 10 before we put it on YouTube? Okay, so here we go. George, I just got to say again that the Filer files are amazing, amazing. The first time I saw that, I went, this is phenomenal, and I've told everybody I know about it, and I just want you to know that we're sending you a check in support of the Filer files. I know you have an offer on your website, the Filer files, and we're gonna try to we'll want that disc that you put together of the UFOs pictures, the best ones, and so we'll be sending you a check tomorrow morning.
Okay, thank you. People who are interested in getting a copy of files, I sent out about 35,000 emails out. Just write to Major Star, one word, Major Star in the sky, only Major Star at Verizon.net.
Right. If you find, sir, in the upcoming months that you are going to be making a trip to New York City, please let me know.
Okay.
Because we want to have dinner with you. The group would be there. We would love to, on a more casual basis, know you better on a one-to-one. And I also, sir, would like to ask you in a month or two if we could do a part 2 of your interview. Is that all right?
Sure.
Because I know
my granddaughter is going to school in New York at Berkeley College.
Ah, okay. So maybe there'd be a point when you visit her?
Something like that, yes.
Well, just keep us posted, please, because we would love that. And again, I'll call you for a date in a couple of months. We could do a part 2 because there's a lot of other areas that we would love to get your input on. And sir, it's been a total honor for me and the group, and a total pleasure to be speaking with you. Group, we thank Major George Filer III. Sir, that applause is for you and your work. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Keep looking up in the sky. They're around.
You bet we will, sir. And we'll talk to you soon. Much love to you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.